Well, hello to everyone watching online. We're here at Reuters HQ in London on day one of Future News Worldwide 2019. We have 100 delegates here from 53 countries in the room. And our next speaker is one of India's most well-known and respected journalists. Sreenivasan Jain is managing editor of New Delhi Television, India's most respected 24-hour news and current affairs broadcaster. He currently anchors an award-winning weekly ground reportage and investigative show, Truth versus Hype, which focuses on political corruption, conflict zones, and untold stories of social and economic tensions. He also anchors a daily show, Reality Check, which aims at debunking official myths and government propaganda in a post-truth environment. Sreenivasan has a whole host of awards, including being selected as Journalist of the Year in 2014 and 2015 and Anchor of the Year at EMBA Awards in 2016. Please welcome Sreenivasan Jain. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Is the mic working okay? Okay. Hi everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you so much, Future News Worldwide, for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you. There's nothing more flattering for a journalist's ego, especially when you're at the late stage of your career, to come down all the way and to speak to audiences like this. So, with only the flattering bits of your career highlighted, none of the low points. So speaking truth to power, how journalism can rebuild trust by investigating and exposing official falsehoods. That's what we're here to speak about. Now, on this business of speaking truth to power, before I talk about how it has influenced the work that I've been doing, it's important to first understand how this particular debate has been unfolding in India, where the cost of speaking truth to power has been raised very, very high, much as it has in other parts of the world as well. So the story coming out of India on the media, especially in the last few years, is similar to what is happening around the world, but is also different in some ways. So we are not quite yet like Turkey, where journalists are being arrested in large numbers. We're not quite yet like Russia, where they're being killed again in high numbers. We're not quite yet like America, where the head of state actually says that the press is the enemy of the people. Now, it's not as if journalists are not being killed in India. In the past 6 years, about 300 journalists have been killed. We've also slid further down on the Reporters Without Borders World Freedom Index from 136 to 138. So we were already pretty low. We slid further. But the real story coming out of India is how a very vast and diverse media landscape have been largely reduced to becoming propagandists of the government. It's not as if we've not had crony media or cowardly editors and proprietors in the past, but the scale at which it has happened under the Modi government is something which is quite unprecedented. And now they've been elected for a second term of another 5 years. This crony media don't speak truth to power. They speak power's version of truth. This is a sort of coup that we've seen unfolding in newsroom after newsroom without shots being fired, without necessarily having to kill or arrest journalists or take recourse to laws, defamation laws, broadcast laws, which, as it is in most countries, are tilted against freedom of press. But this has happened as a sort of bloodless coup. Owners, proprietors, promoters, increasingly across the board, through genuine or assumed threats, have folded all too easily, turning their platforms, their networks, into either mouthpieces of the government or choking off uncomfortable reporting. This is a pretty remarkable achievement, all the more given the scale of the Indian media. India has, and I'm not making these numbers up, 400 news channels, okay? So out of 800 registered channels, 50%, 400, are just news. America has 4 Britain has 5. We have 400. And we have about 100,000 registered newspapers and countless websites. Size used to be a strength. There was diversity, there was anarchy, but size has also become a liability because there is too much media fighting for too little advertising and financial resources. So that has led to the bottom being dropped out, standards being lowered. That has led to public credibility being eroded. That has led to bad financial choices by promoters. All of this has made the media vulnerable for the kind of capture that we've seen happening over the past several years. It's been building up, and it's got accelerated in recent times. Let me give you a quick couple of examples of what I'm talking about and why this is particularly challenging, because when you shoot a journalist, you arrest a journalist, it draws global outrage. But when you sack a journalist, it's like a tree falling in the night. Nobody pays that much attention, right? So, quick example. One of India's largest circulating English dailies, mainstream dailies, likes to take a middle-of-the-road approach, generally, preferably aligned to the establishment of the day. Anyway, they bring in this editor from outside. He's done some time at the Wall Street Journal. He puts together a team. Under his watch, they start something called a hate crime tracker, because their assumption was that hate crime is going up under this government. The government is not very happy with it. The proprietor of this newspaper has ambitions of her own. Every year, they host a big summit where they call the powerful and the famous. They would like the Prime Minister to come as the chief guest. She goes to meet the Prime Minister, his Prime Minister's office. There it is conveyed that they're not very happy with this hate tracker business. And broadly, a kind of message is conveyed that if you'd like the Prime Minister to attend, the editor has to go. As it turns out, within a few weeks of that, the editor resigns. He issues the standard boilerplate statement. I'm so happy to have served my time here. I have done this, this, this. I move on to other opportunities. The newspaper also puts out a boilerplate. The editor goes. On his last working day, the hate tracker comes down from their website. No explanation, no apology, statement, nothing. Just gone. The team that he's put together is made to feel unwanted over the course of the several months that follow. They all resign. This newspaper has brought back into line. Another example from a well-regarded television channel in India, a Hindi channel. Again, mainstream, middle of the road, not trying to rock the boat too much. They bring in an anchor who's a little more provocative, combative. He wants to shake things up. Prime Minister has a habit of interacting with the beneficiaries of government schemes, video interactions. In one such interaction, a woman from a very poor and rural part of India thanks him for doubling her income. This clip is circulated by the official machinery. So this particular anchor sends, and the show sends a crew down to the village where this woman lives. They do some interviews, do a little bit of investigation, find that, in fact, her income has not doubled. They air all of this. Within a few weeks, every time this anchor's show comes on, the channel starts to black out mysteriously. Just goes off air for a few minutes, seconds, comes back on, goes off, comes back on. This happens repeatedly. Again, the channel is told, if you want to make this go away, do the needful. So, and this comes out later after this anchor and several people have resigned. It turns out that the anchor was told by his proprietors that, look, you can do whatever you want on your show as long as you don't name the Prime Minister. Now, this is very Kafkaesque because almost every government scheme in India is named after the Prime Minister. So the editor, not surprisingly, resigns, the anchor resigns, a bunch of people who were seen to have stirred the pot resign. Again, this channel comes back into line. Again, no shots fired, all happening behind the scenes. Then you come to what happens if you don't fall in line. And that comes down to my organization where I work, NDTV. And normally, we don't like to talk about our own organizations because we, as journalists, report the news. We are not the news. But very quickly, what has happened to us is that because we've chosen not to fall in line, because we've chosen not to become propagandists, they have come at us with everything they've got. So over the past several years, Every single investigating agency in this country has booked charges against us. Everything from money laundering to tax fraud to stock market manipulation. These are all completely bogus charges. There are issues that every organization has when it comes to questions of tax compliance and stock market disclosures, which can easily be sorted out through a much more ordinary day-to-day process of negotiation. But they have brought the wrath of the entire government on us. Our promoters have been raided in the early hours of the morning, and they're amongst the most well-respected figures in television news journalism in India, and so on and so forth. Now, what does this actually mean to this question of speaking truth to power? Because what has happened in the past several years is that this has spooked our advertisers, this has spooked our sponsors, this has led to a drop in our revenue. We've had to lay off people, which is very unfortunate for any organization. We've had to cut down on the resources that we have for doing journalism. And then you go into a negative spiral, because as your content drops, your quality drops, your ratings fall, that leads to a further drop in revenue, so you are bled by 1,000 cuts, right? This throws up 3 challenges to speaking truth to power, because at the end of the day, I'm a journalist. I'm not a suit. I'm not working in that part of the organization. I have to deal with whatever the consequences of this kind of environment are on the work that I do and my team does. One, as we know, speaking truth to power costs money. First, it comes at a price, which is what I just described to you. The second is that it is an expensive business. For the kind of deep dives into official malfeasance and wrongdoing that we all love to do, of the kind that gets made into movies like Spotlight, that's expensive. So I actually had a chance to talk to one of the Boston Globe's Spotlight team about their big investigation into the church sex abuse scandal. And he said it takes up to 6 months to a year to do one story. And the cost of that can go up to close to even $500,000. Now, how many of us, especially from those countries that Donald Trump likes to call shithole countries, how many of us can actually afford something like that? Number 2 challenge, speaking truth to power. When you have a public that is increasingly becoming fact-averse, it's all the more important that you have to be darn sure you're speaking the truth. And you better be clear how power is implicated in that. That link has to be clear, or as clearly as verifiable through facts. There's no point falling back on vague perceptions of simply saying, oh, things have become worse since Trump has come, or Modi has come, or Boris Johnson has come, were it to come to that. You have to make a convincing argument. Now, let me take you through some examples of how we've given the circumstances, we've tried to find low-cost, high-impact ways of questioning power or of establishing a worsening. Now, this dilemma came to us most sharply in the fall of 2015, when after the particularly brutal killing of a Muslim man in Uttar Pradesh, which is a northern Indian state, on allegations that he had slaughtered a cow. This has become a big issue in India, as you will see shortly. And after the shooting to death of a gentleman called M.M. Kalburgi, who was an intellectual dissenter in the southern state of Karnataka, a large number of Indian writers, scholars, and playwrights returned their government awards. They said they were protesting a growing climate of intolerance, or as they put it, an assault of freedom of life and expression. They were immediately mocked by the government, saying, vigilantism happens all the time. Governments in the past have long been intolerant of dissent, and so on and so forth, which are on the face of it valid assertions. But something had become palpably worse in the past 5 years. So last year, as a start, we began to tabulate hateful comments by high-ranking Indian political figures, ministers, governors, chief ministers of provinces, members of parliament, members of provincial assemblies, party bosses, and so on. By hate speech, we meant comments that are directly bigoted or use dog whistles, target minorities, and call for violence. These were scoured from the public domain by scrolling through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of entries. and also scouring social media, cross-checking this from source every time to make sure that these entries were authentic. Our contention was that this phenomenon, which we called VIP hate speech, is not new in Indian politics, but it had deteriorated. And this is what we found, if I can get this technology thing to work. So we found that it had gone up 520% under the Modi government. That figure is now over 700%. This is a year old. It's now gone up to 700%. From May 2014 to last year, there were 131 instances of VIP hate speech compared to just 21 instances under the previous government, which was run by the Congress party. So 90% of the hate came from the ruling party, which is the BJP. Now, and this is important, in only 6 of these 131 instances, that is in only 5% of all instances, was there evidence of a politician being reprimanded or cautioned or having to issue a public apology. 95% of the time, the VIP hater faced no consequence. So there were a large number of repeat offenders. Okay? Let me just play you a clip of that, just to give you a sense of.
All right, and further proof that hate has no consequences. In 21 cases, the VIP hater has been a repeat offender. Here are the most notorious repeat offenders, starting with a BJP MLA from Telangana.
अरे हम तो कई वर्षों से ये दिन की प्रतीक्षा कर रहे हैं कि कब तुम गद्दार सर उठाए और हम तुम्हारे सर कलम कर दें। अरे अयोध्या में राम मंदिर तो बन के ही रहेगा। उसकी कोई औकात नहीं जो अयोध्या में राम मंदिर रोड से बना दे।
अगर ये मूवी हमारे भाग्यनगर में रिलीज होगी तो हम उसको रोकेंगे। जिस भी थिएटर में, जो भी थिएटर में अगर ये मूवी रिलीज होगी, उस थिएटर में घुसकर हम थिएटर को आग लगा देंगे। ये आप व्हाट्सएप के माध्यम से फैलाओ।
तो मुसलमान तो देश के अंदर रहना नहीं चाहिए। उन्होंने जनसंख्या के आधार पर देश का बंटवारा कर लिया, तो फिर यहाँ इस देश के अंदर रहने की क्या आवश्यकता थी? फिर उनको अलग भूभाग दे दिया गया, बांग्लादेश या पाकिस्तान जाएं, यहाँ क्या काम है उनका?
Now, a significant number of instances of hate speech also invoke the rhetoric of cow protection, something that has gained currency under this government. Elected leaders, including MPs, MLAs, and even chief ministers, have used the language of vigilantes while calling for violence against those who kill cows.
माता ना मानते हो, उसकी हत्या करते हो। मैंने वादा किया था ऐसे लोगों के हाथ पर तुड़वा दूंगा।
हमारी माँ का कोई अपमान करेगा, हम मर जाएंगे, सहन नहीं करेंगे। मर जाएंगे, मार देंगे। हमारी भारत माता रोज क्या कर रही है इंडिया? भारत माता की तरफ कोई उंगली उठाता है कोई आतंकी, तो हमारे लोग शहीद भी होते हैं, सामने वाले को मारते भी हैं।
हमारे छात्रों को रूस, अमेरिका, जर्मनी और इंग्लैंड के वैज्ञानिकों ने भी सिद्ध किया कि भारत के गौवंश का अगर असमय खून गिरेगा धरती पर, तो वहाँ भूकंप आएंगे, जलजले आएंगे और ज्वालामुखी फटेंगे।
Another popular theme of VIP haters was repeated attempts to delegitimize the Muslim faith, urging Muslims to accept their Hindu ancestry and inciting fears of a Muslim takeover by playing on fears of their excessive fertility.
देश में समस्याएं खड़ी हो रही जनसंख्या के कारण, उसके लिए हिंदू जिम्मेदार नहीं है। जिम्मेदार वो है जो 4 बीवी और 40 बच्चों की बात करते हैं।
So Subramaniam Swamy also tweeting on this again and again about how Muslims should accept that they're Hindu. Too many tweets for us to list all of them, but here's just a sampling. And also Surendra Singh, BJP MLA, about Muslims having to assimilate into the country. Those who are free, don't do it, are free to leave. Another BJP MP, don't try to tell us we won't tolerate insults to the community. Let's decide a date, take on the Muslims, and what have you.
Okay, so when this aired, did it miraculously lead to the powerful hate mongers to dial down their hate speech? Obviously not. But what this kind of journalism does is that it allows for an evidence-based argument that some things have become demonstrably worse and that the worsening directly implicates those in power, right? Both the VIPs who've dialed up the hate as well as implicating their bosses who, by not acting against them, by ensuring that the hater doesn't face consequences, are also complicit in this kind of rhetoric. So a low-cost, high-impact project. Let me give you another example from a closely linked phenomenon that we just referred to, which is, as I mentioned, the rise in hate crimes, specifically the rise in attacks, mainly on Muslims, on charges that they've been eating beef or transporting cattle for slaughter. Now, cow slaughter is banned in most parts of India and is deeply frowned upon as a social practice. But obviously, vigilantism is illegal too. Killing or attacking people is against the law. And moreover, many of these attacks are not without any clear basis or evidence of slaughter. They are more designed to target minorities. Now, these have spiked, again, through those who are counting it, including us, 9,000% under the past 5 years of this government, 9,000%. And it's very, very common to find these attacks being filmed and going viral on social media. Let me just play you a clip to give you a sense of how we first come across these attacks. These are all from different parts of the country. This is all cell phone video. And each attack is filmed and circulated and then, triggers a fresh one. Oh, sorry. So the response from the government tends to be, this is terrible, but we have nothing to do with it. But in many instances, the attackers get away because there is complicity from the administration and the police, which often sides with these vigilantes. They're called Gau Rakshaks. Gau Rakshak in Hindi means cow protectors, but it's a stand-in term for this kind of vigilantism, right? Most of the time, they side with them as opposed to the victims. Now, we've done quite a lot of work on this, but I'm just going to play you a sample from a story we did in the summer of 2016, where we traveled to a state called Maharashtra in Western India, where we accompanied a truck occupied by cattle traders to capture the experience of a vigilante attack from the inside, to show you how the vigilantes are linked to the ruling establishment, the reaction of the police and how it sides with them. And this is unfolding in a province which is ruled by India's ruling party.
Now, to understand the impunity with which Gau Rakshaks operate, we decided to conduct an operation of our own. We took this truck, which contains buffaloes, and decided to follow it with one of our own team members, Sanjay Mandal, posing as an assistant with a hidden camera inside the truck. We made sure that the truck driver, as well as those who are responsible for it, showed us that they had all the requisite paperwork. They had a receipt to show that the buffaloes had been purchased, that they were not in a condition where they could give milk or could give birth. We had a receipt to show that they'd got an animal fitness certificate, and as well as all the Motor Vehicle Act papers. Despite all of that, here's what happened when this truck set off. Within an hour of leaving Pune, near the village of Saswad, a group of Gau Rakshaks stopped the truck. Their aggression levels clearly audible. They yanked the driver out and then forced their way into the passenger seat. With Gau Rakshaks in the cabin, the truck is brought to a local police station. Here, even before seeing the evidence, the police seem to be taking cues from this young man who identifies himself as a member of a local Hindutva group.
आप कौन से संस्था से हैं?
मैं समस्त हिंदू आघाड़ी का कार्यकर्ता हूँ।
ठीक है।
ये जो गाड़ी है हड़पसर से फलटन के लिए महीस कटने के लिए जा रही है। इसमें
ठीक है।
महीस है।
ठीक है।
इस गाड़ी में पहले बैल भी थे।
अच्छा।
वो बैल इन्होंने किधर तो निकाल दिए है नीचे। और अब ये गाड़ी फलटन के लिए कटिंग के लिए जा रही है। हमारे सब कार्यकर्ता रात भर जाके इस गाड़ी के पीछे थे। अभी ये गाड़ी
His supporters claim to have got a tip-off from someone called Pandit Modak.
पंडित मोदक
हाँ।
उन्होंने हमको लिंक दी थी।
अच्छा।
तो हम रात से उधर खड़े थे, लेकिन एक तो 10 बजे भरने वाली थी गाड़ी, फिर 12 बजे, फिर उसके बाद सुबह 10 बजे।
अच्छा।
तो अभी 10 बजे उन्होंने गाड़ी भरा और लेके जा रहे हैं। तभी सभी ये मिलके समस्त आघाड़ी मिलके और हमारे सब मोदक जी के सब गोरक्षक जी के वो गोरक्षक है।
वो कोई गौशाला चलाते हैं।
On his Facebook community page, Parshuram Modak is described as a Gaurakshak who's worked with RSS and BJP for 40 years.
ये जो गौरक्षक हैं, जैसे ट्रक रोक लेते हैं, छीन लेते हैं सारा और उसको सब कब्जे में ले लेते हैं, ये कैसे कर सकते हैं? कानून के बाहर नहीं है ये?
उन्होंने इन्फॉर्मेशन दिया है, तो जो भी आदमी है वो अगर इन्फॉर्मेशन देता है कुछ,
हाँ।
तो उनको पुलिस स्टेशन वही बताता है कि आप लेके आ जाओ, पुलिस स्टेशन लेके आ जाओ वो व्हीकल।
बट ये सिर्फ इन्फॉर्मेशन नहीं दे रहे हैं, इन्होंने कानून अपने हाथ में लिया, इन्होंने ट्रक को रोका, इन्होंने बाहर उनको लोगों को घसीट के निकाला, उनका फ़ोन छीना, तो इनके खिलाफ भी एक्शन नहीं होना चाहिए क्या?
देखिए वो अभी हमारे पीआई साहब आएंगे। अच्छा। उनको बुलाया है।
हाँ।
उनसे बात करेंगे आगे क्या है वैसे।
But the police action, it is clear, will only be one-sided. In the end, a case is registered, not a slaughter, but under animal violation laws, that the cattle didn't have enough water or fodder. Helping the police, Gaurakshak sitting in the room in which the FIR is being drafted.
आप बाद में बातचीत करेंगे, तो दर्ज तो करने दो, नहीं तो आप उससे लेके जाओ बाहर आने से बंद कराना दे, कशाला वो नहीं करता।
ये माल उतार
The owner of the truck is furious.
खरीदी बिक्री करने के लिए स्लॉटर का नहीं है
ये स्लॉटर का नहीं है।
ये हम पे झूठा आरोप लगाकर लीगल काम का लीगल पेपर रहने के बावजूद भी पुलिस हमको मदद नहीं कर रही है और किसी के दबाव में आकर गुना दाखिल करने की साजिश कर रही है।
सही। नहीं एक सेकंड।
The police inspector refuses to comment.
If you can summarize जो दोनों तरफ से arguments हैं, वो तो बता दीजिए।
So we just got a demonstration here of how cattle vigilantism works and how the state machinery is in a sense complicit with these Gaurakshaks. While the police official claimed that he was acting in a non-partisan way, he wasn't taking sides. It's fairly clear of what has just happened here. With Sonal Matharu and camera person Sanjay Mandal, Sreenivasan Jain in Pune for NDTV.
Right. So again, what has this led to? A brief dip in the vigilante activities of this particular outfit shortly after the report aired. But again, a story like this can be used and was used to challenge the official line that there is no political or state or police patronage of this kind of phenomenon. So again, the link to power. Now, something like this actually costs money. It was done at a time when we had a little bit more money because you had to go and embed yourself with these cattle transporters and wait for several days and so on and so forth. When I say cost money, I mean by the standards of money that we consider expensive in India. But since then, we are even more broke than we were earlier. So here is a more recent low-cost report that we did into a particularly awful case of cow-related murder in the northern state of Indian state of Uttar Pradesh. Two Muslim men, Qasim and Samyuddin, were beaten on the false pretext that they were slaughtering a cow. Qasim was killed as a result of his injuries. Samyuddin was badly injured. And there was no proof that there was any cow in the vicinity. I'll just play you a clip first of how this is again from cell phone video. And this actually shows the body of Qasim being dragged by a mob. Perhaps many of them were part of the attack on him. So they're dragging him almost like a slaughtered goat, and the police is actually making way for this rather than take action against them. And this is Samyuddin, who survived the attack. Okay. Now, the state where this attack took place is again run by the ruling party. The accused are all out on bail because the police, according to the court, failed to provide enough evidence. Right? This is another way of subverting justice. You just produce either weak evidence or contradictory evidence. So in his case, the police actually claimed this was not a hate crime. This was not a cow slaughter-related crime. This had to do with some motorcycles hitting each other. Right? So the contradictory evidence was one of the reasons why the case fell apart, and the men who were accused were out on bail. So we sent a team with a hidden camera to speak to the accused, posing as their sympathizers, saying they were part of the same kind of ideological mindset, and this is what we got.
Posing as a research scholar from US, doing field research on RSS and Hindutva outfit, we asked Rakesh that whether he was pleased with what he had done. Rakesh not only admitted that he did play a role in the lynching, but also that it was very much related to cow slaughter.
बिल्कुल बहुत बड़ा खुश हूँ मैं, और मैंने सुना बोला भी मुझसे, और भी लोग आए थे मिलने भाई, उन्होंने कहा कि आप क्या कहना चाहते हैं इस बारे में। मैं 1000 काटने के लिए तैयार, 1000 बार जेल चला जाऊं। ऐसे मुझे पता लगा कि इतना बड़ा कट्टर था गौ कट्टर, पहले तो मुझे पता नहीं लगा, बाद में लगा कि इतनी गाय काटी थी। जब उन पुलिस वालों ने भी बताया कि हमारी पकड़ से छूट गौ हत्या के नाम पर बहुत बड़े क्रांतिकारी नेता बनेंगे।
He said even while in jail for 5 weeks, he proudly declared what he had done before jail authorities.
तो पहली बार जेल गया, थोड़ा डर लगना चाहिए था, नहीं, और वहाँ भी मैंने धूम मचाई जेल के अंदर, मुझे खुश हुआ। और जेलर को मैंने जाते ही बताया जब उसके सामने पेश हुआ, किस केस में हो, आए हो 302 307, फुल मर्डर हाफ मर्डर, क्यों हुआ, क्या हुआ, मैं गाय काट रहे थे, मैं उसको काट के बात खत्म हो गई। इसलिए जेलर से भी कहा, मैंने बोला ना काट के आया, बोला आपने, हाँ मैंने कहा मुसलमान गाय काट रहे थे, मैं उसको काट दिया जेलर के सामने अंदर जाकर।
He says he was released from bail to a hero's welcome, which has only added to the numbers of what he calls his mini army.
मेरी 3-4 गाड़ी मुझे जेल पर लेने गई, राकेश सिसोदिया जिंदाबाद के नारे जेल पर लगे मेरे नाम के। जब मुझे रात को 10 बजे निकाला गया, स्वागत किया, लोगों ने बाहें फैला दी, बोले भैया मुझे बड़ा गर्व हुआ। लोगों को दुख होता है जेल से आया हूँ, परेशानी होती, मुझे सुख, बड़ा सुकून मिला कि मैं जेल से आया हूँ और बहुत ऊंचा काम करके आया हूँ, मुझे अच्छा लगा, और भी आज भी अच्छा है। और कोई फिर भी मेरी फौज तैयार है, कोई क्षेत्र में गाय काटे कटवा देंगे, खड़े होकर 1000 बार जेल जाना पड़े, गाय के लिए बलिदान हो जाए।
The only mistake he claims is that his boys made cell phone videos.
अगर आपकी फौज है, आपकी मानती है, आपने इनको पिटवाया, आपको पहले बोल देना चाहिए था कि वीडियो मत बनवाओ।
नहीं, मना करते करते बच्चे नहीं मानते उस टाइम पर। और सुन, पहला केस हुआ ऐसा वीडियो बनाने का, अब नहीं बनाएंगे, अब कभी बनाएंगे ही नहीं, मोबाइल भी कर के जाएंगे, कोई काम होगा तो ऐसा, अब नहीं बनाएंगे वो खुद ही। अब रो रहे परेशान, छोटे बच्चे भी जो बेचारे ऐसे जो नाबालिग ही हैं।
He also said that the police was in their favor, unlike in the earlier regime.
तो पुलिस आपके फेवर की बात कर रही है,
पक्ष में रही, और ये सब रहा सरकार का था, बाकी पुलिस पक्ष में नहीं होती। अगर आज हम खां बैठा हुआ होता आज भी वहाँ, तो हमारा गाँव जहन्नुम बन गया होता पक्का वाला, और 1 करोड़ रुपया दिया होता कासिम को, 50 लाख मिला होता, फ्लैट भी मिला होता पक्का वाला। हमारे भाई मर गए वहाँ जेल में, पीछे भी मैंने उसमें आंदोलन किया, एक रवि लड़का वहीं मर गया था, कई दिन उसकी बॉडी रखी विशाला गाँव में, और जब 25 लाख डीएम ने दिया था, दिया नहीं था, मैंने कहा बॉडी को रखो वहाँ, आपकी तो मदद पर ले जाकर, आपकी मदद हो गई।
In the video, Qasim badly wounded. A bystander is heard asking for him to be given water. This is Rakesh's chilling response.
कासिम को मुझसे कह रहा था, भैया आवाज नहीं निकल रही तुझसे, थोड़ा पानी के साथ जाओ, तुझे पानी पिलेगा नहीं, तेने कहते नहीं, मरती हुई गाय को पानी नहीं दिया, और ये मेरी फौज आज तुझे छोड़ेगी नहीं, 1-1 मिनट मारेगी। मुझे लग नहीं रहा था कासिम मरेगा, मुझे पता था वो मरेगा समय दिन, वो बच गया।
So after this report aired, we were contacted by the lawyers of the victims. they said that this amounts to what is called an extrajudicial confession, when you confess to your crime to someone who's not part of the criminal justice system, and this can actually be used to reinvestigate the case. And in fact, they did go to court with this, and the police were forced to reopen their investigations into this and to some similar videos we made. I'm not playing all of them for you in the interest of time. And so there was a response to this in this particular instance. But of course, there are many, many such cases where, again, because of this complicity between such actions and power, the vigilantes most often get away and the victims are left without justice. So this is, in a sense, the environment in which we are working, and this is the kind of journalism that we are trying to produce under these circumstances. I'll just wrap by saying that, you know, one of the most disturbing aspects of all of this has been the fact that people largely seem not to have an appetite for listening to truth to power. They seem more interested in hearing power's version of truth. And that is one of the reasons why some of the most propagandist channels in India, the equivalent of Fox News on steroids, are the highest rated networks in India. They're the most watched, and they're the most flush with revenue. Of course, the government is constantly feeding them information and giving them access as opposed to others. And so this is very disturbing, because as journalists, we were taught that you speak truth to power, you call out the powerful, and that's good for business. That's what people want to watch and absorb. But here, there seems to be this peculiar inversion where sycophancy and propaganda and defending power seems to sell more. So this is something which I don't have any easy answers for, but I think there is a challenge on those of us who are trying to speak the truth to make the truth more compelling, to make it more relatable. Perhaps, and I say this with a lot of hesitation, perhaps even to sensationalize it, because that's unfortunately what's happened with the media on the other side, that they have the loudest platform, they make the most noise, and those that are quote-unquote called as part of the liberal establishment are still trying to stick to the old BBC tram lines of how you tell stories. So that's something we need to figure out. We also need to find a way of making people feel that they have a stake when the media is threatened, when freedom of expression is threatened, when the media is threatened. We are the canary in the mine shaft. If we start to get choked, if we start to feel pressure, then they will as well. Tomorrow, if they post on Facebook, or if they post on Twitter, or they try to organize and I'm talking of ordinary people here, ordinary Indians, organize a film screening or a talk, and the government comes down hard on you, that's all part of the same phenomena. So I think that making that link is important. I don't know if we're doing it successfully enough, but it's certainly something that we should all think about moving forward. Thank you very much indeed.
I think they've just gone out to get the microphones. That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We've got the mics coming.
Some water quickly
yes,
while they're getting
no
the
problem.
microphones.
Who would like to ask? We'll take a first question from over here, second row. Second row on the left-hand side. Just one question, please, as well, just so that we can try and get as many different voices heard.
Hello, I'm Daniel from Romania. You've said that investigative journalism especially costs a lot of money, and I'm just curious about the ethics. If you have ever done this, have you ever had to pay for information, or is it an usual or unusual practice to pay for information in journalism, especially investigative journalism? Thank you.
No. So the short answer is no. We do not like to pay for information, and so far we've not had to pay for any information. That is a practice which, I mean, there's a lot of bad journalistic practice you'll find in India, but that particular practice where you actually pay for news, which I found happens in other parts of the world, is not an issue yet. Yes, there are some instances where other media had to do that. They've had to buy information from people. But we don't do that, and we haven't had to do it.
But can you trust that information if it's false?
Well, as I said, that's why we don't do it. And we don't have that as a big problem in India. The biggest problem we face is that we do not have enough insider information coming out. So wherever you have authoritarian regimes, sources start to dry up and clamp down. And so getting information from insiders, from whistleblowers, has become very difficult. They're not worried about money. They're worried about the other price, the cost that they pay for having leaked that information and getting caught.
Question from this side, just behind the pillar here.
Hello, I'm Zanji from Zambia.
Hello.
I just wanted to ask you a question. When you're talking about how the police are so protected by maybe norms or maybe protecting the cows, it's the same thing in Zambia. I was actually threatened and I was almost arrested for covering a story about a girl who was wearing a short skirt. So Zambia is very conservative, it's very religious. And I was refused to, I was threatened about that and I had to take the story down. So I wanted to ask you how you deal with that. Like how do you, I'm sure you've got a lot of threats from the government and from the police. How do you deal in such situations? I'd like to learn from that.
Well, again, to be fair, stories like this, when we air, there's really no pressure from the police to that extent. In fact, stuff like this actually embarrasses them. And then they feel compelled to sort of come out and try to give some kind of statement or cover up. But as I described earlier, the way that the cumulative mass of this kind of journalism impacts us is that the government comes after you at a much higher level. So it's not perhaps for individual stories as much, but they just come after you as an organization. They come after your money, which is the crucial thing. And that is really the bigger threat. So, and as I said, we are fighting that, but that's a very difficult battle to fight. It's much easier to fight something at a localized level, but when they come at you at that level, it's very tough.
Just by the pillar there, yeah.
Hello, this is Adil Samar from Pakistan. This was like a very thought-provoking slides and all the videos, because in Southeast Asian countries we have faced the same situations there. So my question is, like in Pakistan, where the Muslims are in majority, and in India, where the Hindus are in majority, the same hate speech things and all that stuff, it really occurs on both sides of the border. So what is the future of this particular thing you see about, because of your experience and all those things, that how actually we can eradicate this particular thing from our society? Like you can see a lot of this particular stuff happening in Pakistan, just like you have mentioned the things that happened in India. So do you think that through journalism we can eradicate this thing, or there is a lack of education in our people that they don't understand the religion, and we have like the religious norms that are holding the society, the whole society, because because if you see our society in Asian countries, they are basically ruled by the religious norms. So what do you think about, like, how can we eradicate this particular thing from our society?
Okay, so not to sound cynical, but I would say as journalists, it's not really our job to try and eradicate things from society, right? Our job is simply to expose wrongdoing and to hold those behind it to account. And I think that itself is a way in which you can curb this. Because if you think about this kind of speech, the only reason it thrives is because those in power practice it and are allowed to practice it without a cost. So what you as a journalist have to do is to raise that level of cost. You have to make sure that they face the consequences of it. And as I said, by doing stuff like this, which you make it high impact, you make a convincing argument, and you directly draw the line between what has happened and power, and you do this repeatedly again and again, somewhere you hope this will shame those in power into saying, okay, this is now becoming embarrassing, we have to people are paying attention, the world is taking note of it, and we have to put a stop to it. So I really think that we are not social reformers, we're journalists, and we have to use that tool we have the most effectively to call out this kind of practice.
That over there, thank you.
Hi, I'm Dhriti from the US, but I'm from India. I'm representing the US. So I had a question. I saw your brilliant interview with Rahul Gandhi, which I thought was very refreshing, right before the elections. And so my story goes like, I just retweeted that and, said some like words of appreciation, and I got a lot of hate from the Modi Bhaks just for simply retweeting. So I want to know your experience about, actually doing the interview and the sort of aftermath, like what happened, what kind of hate did you get? Because, it was interesting that you mentioned that, hate coming from, of course, like the government cracking down on the organization. But I think at a personal level, with the kind of trolling that you see in India is just at an absolute rise. And what do you think about social media, the WhatsApp university sort of system that's happening right now?
So, I think we need about half an hour to answer all that you've asked me. Rahul Gandhi, for those who don't know, is India's leader of, head of the opposition. Look, for that particular interview, I don't think I actually got trolled and abused as much as one normally does. One normally gets a lot of love on any given day. That was actually an interview where remarkably even the critics of the Congress party thought that it went off reasonably well. I didn't really let him off the hook. He also answered reasonably well. So that wasn't too bad. But, again, to your point about trolling and abuse, I think that the position I am in as a male Anglophone journalist in a mainstream national media network in India, I'm probably the most privileged when it comes to abuse. I get a ton of abuse, and like everybody in the room, it gets under your skin. But it's really the women who get the worst of it, and also vernacular journalists who are reporting and doing their journalism not in English, but in Hindi and India's many other languages. They get death threats. They get it far worse. So my equivalent in NDTV actually has a bodyguard following him around. He faces some pretty serious threats. So yes, it affects me and it influences my work. Don't want to spend too much time getting into that, but not as much as others in the fraternity.
The end of this row here.
Hi, my name is Isaac. I'm from Canada. My question was that the government in many different countries is pretty much controlling the media and controlling what a lot of journalists have to put out there. So as a journalist, how do you make sure that what you're putting out is actually not fake news and not biased and actually the truth as opposed to just favoring the government because you need the funding?
Right. So, ultimately, Isaac, all of this boils down to, as you know, who you work for, right? So what do all of us want? We want benign employers. We want clean, quote unquote, clean money as much as possible without strings attached, right? So every news organization has sacred cows. But the question is, do you have 1 cow, 2 cows, or 100 cows, right? That determines the answer to your question, that can you do journalism without fear or favor, which is not biased in favor of the government. So fortunately, the organization I work for has largely allowed me and others to practice the kind of journalism we all want to do. It has come at a cost, but they still allow it. But there are organizations which don't and which fall in line. So, that's really the ideal, that you have promoters and proprietors who are willing to stand up against the government. And then all these questions of fake news and all of that doesn't matter. Otherwise, it becomes part of your journalistic reality. And sadly, there are hundreds and hundreds of journalists who are being forced to do that right now in India, and I'm sure in other countries of the world.
Right at the back there.
Can I just quickly add one point to add to that, because it all seems like doom and gloom, but actually one of the things that digital has done, again, I'm sure this is true the world over, is that some of the most anarchic, subversive journalism in India is happening in the digital space, because the operating costs are much lower than for mainstream, and you can do crowdfunding and other ways of fundraising, which is not coming with all the strings attached, which is not tied to corporate and others who have a stake in power. So again, I'm not sure about the situation in your country, but in India, for young journalists, digital has become, frankly, one of the most exciting spaces to work in. And that's where you really can push the boundaries.
Hi, my name's Chelsea. I'm from Northern Ireland. I was just wondering, as a journalist, how do you personally deal with the frustrations of injustices in your country? Obviously, as a journalist, and these things are going on, but how do you personally feel and deal with the frustrations? Because obviously watching those videos were very moving for somebody who's not even from India. And if you're in that environment, how do you deal with those frustrations?
Binge drinking, mostly. So that's straight away, just gets you through at least the first 24 hours. I mean, if you ask me at a personal level, I am, besides myself with anger. So I can't, it actually is almost like a kind of condition now, where I'm just angry all the time. So it's, look, it's not good. I mean, it's not good. But I think that at least as journalists, we have the outlet of our journalism, right? Through which to channel, quote unquote, our anger at injustice, which as ordinary citizens, you don't. I mean, you can get on social media and, just go off on a rant, but we have this. So that's what I try to do. I try to push out whatever I have to say through the journalism, but you have to be careful because you can't let your anger or your sense of frustration with what's happening cloud your perspective. But that's the best way, frankly.
Can I just quickly say, if anybody's going to reach PLC or Channel 4, can they quickly just meet over at the board? Right. Next question. The lady at the end of the...
Hi, my name is Lisa from Zimbabwe. So some of the problems you mentioned actually exist in my country when you talked about how the lack of resources when you want to do an investigative piece, how you talked about how the media is so polarized. But what I would like to ask you about personally is how you deal with censorship, because we have a lot of self-censorship among the citizens. We also have a lot of self-censorship among the journalists. So if you try to do like a documentary challenging power, asking people what they think about the government and all that, people are not like so keen to talk to you because they feel like, well, I might disappear or something will happen to my family or something like that because of the regime that existed since independence, like for about 37 years. So how do you deal with situations like that? You want to get information from people, but people feel like their lives could be in danger because of the information they're giving to you.
Right. Look, that's a great question for all times. And again, I wish I had a kind of simple silver bullet answer for you. It really varies from situation to situation. So one thing that we face a lot of that problem in TV particularly is because it's a visual medium, so you have to put people on air. And so that makes it even harder than when you're doing, let's say, a print story, where you don't have to have somebody come on. So what ends up happening, because we do a lot of investigative work, is that we try to approach stories like print journalists, even though we're doing it for TV. So a lot of the information is source-based, where you don't necessarily front-end somebody, and you try to protect their identity as much as possible to give them that confidence to speak, right? You set up alternate means of communication with them. So these days, almost everyone in India is on WhatsApp or Signal and whatnot. So I mean, if you can, as much as possible, ensure that you can protect that person's confidentiality without compromising your journalistic standards, because we all like to get stuff on the record, right? And our editors want that as well. So if you can strike that right balance, then you can tease out the truth. The other, quick thing I found reporting these sorts of situations is that if you go in weapons hot, like all guns blazing as a journalist with your recorder, your cameras and all that, you may not get the story. So one thing is to first do like a sort of dry run where you just go and perhaps even as an ordinary citizen, speak to people, talk to them, find out what they have to say, and then you can come in and say, would they like to share this with you for a journalistic piece? So that's one way around it.
We've got time for one last question. Just one brief question, please.
So I'm Azmin from Bangladesh, and you talked about sensationalism and how that's important to have high impact. But looking at the last video and the kind of confidence and arrogance that man had, do you think there's a risk of a Gaurakshak in some other part of India who'd look at that and get encouragement and appreciate that? And as a presenter, how do you balance that risk?
Great question. Again, no easy answers. And also the ethical question about hidden cameras and stings, which we don't want to use that tool very often, right, as journalists. That's not a great way to go, but sometimes you have to go down that route. So I think what you saw was just the clip in isolation, but the way that you try to kind of, in a sense, play down or not sensationalize inherently sensational stories like that is the context in which you frame it. So this was aired as part of like a 1-hour show. So we give you several layers of context to tell you what has been happening in India, how things are getting worse, how justice is collapsing. And then therefore, in order to bring out that phenomena, we've had to resort to this, and this is what the guy has said, right? So I think if you frame it within that box, put it out, it makes it less sensationalist. And then you follow it up with a discussion and whatnot. Rather than just play it in isolation and scream and shout and say, I've got this guy, whatever. So I think that's very important. Is there still a risk somebody could get encouraged by that? Sure. But, sometimes you have to take that editorial call and sort of live by it.
Sreenivasan Jain, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us today. It's been absolutely fascinating.